Great.
All right, there we go. Clark Patterson, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really awesome to have you on the podcast, especially, as someone who lives in Tennessee. I don't live in your congressional district, sadly, but I always love talking to Texas candidates, people that are running for office, because they always have a million different things going on, man. How's the campaign trail been treating you so far?
Well, it's been good, but as you may know, Taylor, most of the congressional races, and this is really also the case with state Senate and state House races, they're not competitive at all. In I don't know why, because this is probably my sixth campaign in the last. Well, I take that back. I actually ran 40 years ago for state house, and then I took like a 30-year break. And so since 2012, I've run in every uh, congressional campaign. So that's what, maybe five. But the point I should make is that none of those races have been competitive. They've either been very red. I think that's the majority of the times I've run against Republicans, but they were all very safe Republican seats. And, I think one time I actually ran against Lloyd Doggett, who is my current opponent.
Hmm.
And this was like, yeah, 4 years ago. So he's like the only Democrat. Yeah, he is the only Democrat I've run against. But again, the seat is completely non-competitive. I was checking out Cook Political Report, and they're basically calling it a solid Democratic race. So he'll probably win with 59% of the vote. And so I don't know why it took me until this uh, campaign to actually look into it, but it turns out in the entire state of Texas, again, this is just Congress, so there's 38 congressional seats. According to the Cook Political Report, there's only one seat that is competitive, and it's number 28. And unfortunately for the LP, there's not an LP candidate. It's the district that's actually just south of San Antonio. I think it goes from like the southern part of San Antonio down to the valley, the Rio Grande Valley.
Right.
And but anyway, the point, of course, is that all other 37 seats are, non-competitive. They're all solid Democrat or solid Republican. So I say this in answering your question. You could almost make the argument. In fact, I would. It's almost like we don't really have a race because Doggett, since it would take an act of God or a madman for him to lose. And I'm not holding my breath, but he will win with likely, in the high 50s, maybe even in the 60s. And there is a Republican opponent. Her name is Jenny Garcia Sharon, but I seriously doubt that she's spending much money, because the Republicans aren't going to put any money into a race like this one, and which is most of them, where there's just not a snowball hill in chances of her winning. And again, I don't know why it never I never saw this really until really this year. It's most of our political races. I mean, honestly, Taylor, it's almost like we're living in a third world country, because obviously, this is politics. So politicians are going to do the safe thing. And so Doggett, he's not going to debate like, in the old days. It seems like the League of Women Voters would always, schedule a nonpartisan debate. But why, if you're sitting on a lead that big, what do you have to gain by debating?
Right.
Well, not much, if anything. So anyway, I guess, so the point is, it's like there's just not, on the legislative level, not counting the statewide races. Well, even there though, I think Beto has an outside chance, but not really. And so maybe Mark Tippett has the same problem. But on our level, the congressional level, and I'm going to guess that it's the same with the state house and state senate districts, because the Republicans control the legislature, so they get to draw the lines every 10 years. And if anything, if we were going to have any competitive races, it would be 2022, because they just the census was just 2 years ago, and Texas gained 2 congressional seats, so that shakes things up a little, where if you're going to have a chance at having a competitive race, it would be the very first election after the census, where we gain the seats. We gain 2 here in Texas. I mean, some states don't gain any. Some states don't gain any seats, but they still redraw the lines, because whichever party's in control, because there may be more people in the state, or maybe fewer people, like in California. California lost a seat, but anyway, the point is, it's like there's no real race at all. It would be like going to a boxing match where one guy, I don't know, is way out ahead, or maybe a football game where there's one team somehow is given a 40-point lead. Well, they're just going to run the clock out. I mean, they're not going to really do anything. They're going to play it safe, and that's kind of how it is on the legislative level, congressional level. And like I say, I think it's a bit different maybe with some of those statewide races, and maybe at the municipal level, where often people are voting for the person because they don't really know what party a particular candidate affiliates with. Maybe in those cases you have closer elections, but I can just honestly say it's almost like there's not really a race, because Doggett is just going to run the clock out. He has nothing to gain by debating even his Republican opponent, never mind a third party candidate like me. And I mean, I use that term, third world country. Well, the old Soviet Union, they actually had elections, and nobody really saw them as having any kind of power. So, yeah, I know a lot of libertarians talk about the duopoly. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, but in our case, it's just there's really just not any competition. I mean, in the past, in fact, the reason I started running years ago is because the ultimate goal, or the minimal goal for any libertarian candidate, was always to have, to get enough votes it was more than the difference between the 2 major parties. So, for example, if there was a libertarian candidate in that congressional district 28, and let's say that the Democrat got 51%, and the Republican got, whatever, 49%. Well, that's actually, that comes out to 100, but I think where I'm going. In other words, where the libertarian, whatever it is, let's say it's 3%, 4%, it would be more than the difference between, the winning Democrat and the second place Republican, where we would actually, the major parties would be forced to say, hey, wait a minute, I need every vote I can get. I better look at those libertarians, what's important to them, and actually pay us some respect. Well, that would be great if we had competitive elections, but like I mentioned before, we don't. And so that doesn't even come into play, because quite frankly, the seat is not really in play. So it's kind of sad, but I look at it like, at some point I was some little 20-year-old kid who first election, and this is years ago, I took it very seriously. I took my vote seriously. And I remember, I did my research, and after doing some research, I realized, there's this third party called the Libertarians, and they make a lot of sense. And the other 2 parties are kind of, they engage in demagoguery. And so that's basically, I became a libertarian, pretty much, with the first election I was able to vote in, first national election. And so that's always my hope. I put out my web, I have a website, and I have a Facebook page. And so the hope is that maybe there's someone like maybe me, or even you, when you were getting into libertarianism, there might be those few people who take their vote pretty seriously, and they actually take the time to do the research And then they realize, oh, wow, we have a $30 trillion federal debt and growing. It's not like it's just standing still. It grows you can go to the debt clock, it's just clicking along, pretty soon
Right.
it'll be 31 trillion. And then we have unfunded liabilities of, much more. And so I guess, so my whole reason for running, because obviously I've given a very strong reason as to why even run, is that because I think there are young people, every year who vote for the very first time for some federal or even state office, and they think that it can make a difference. Their vote can make a difference, and the policies, pro-gun control, anti-gun control, whatever it is, death penalty, immigration, abortion, all the major issues, it actually makes a difference as to which policies are implemented. And so it's kind of like those are the voters, and it's probably not a very high percentage. It's probably not more than maybe 1% of the entire voting population that
Right.
will actually take the time, look into the issues, and they realize, well, these libertarian guys, I mean, they don't seem to be trying to demagogue the issues. They're just laying the facts out as they see them. I may not agree with all the facts, but they're talking about, the wars, the forever wars overseas, or how, the Washington is just printing money out of thin air. And, if you take the time and think it's really important, then, I think many people would come to libertarianism, but I think for whatever reason, people don't take the time or don't think it's particularly important. And so we kind of hover along at our, the LP hovers along at its 2, 3, sometimes we get 4%. And sometimes if there's not a major party candidate in a race, well, of course, we'll get 15, maybe even 20%, but that's kind of the exception. So it's kind of grim, but I always look at it like, it's the young people. Every generation has, they'll have their chance to kind of start the world all over again, as it said. And so that's why I keep running, because I think that, if we can just reach enough young people to look at things, and pretty soon when they realize just how much debt there is, and, it's not going away. You can always repudiate the debt, of course, but there's consequences to that. But anyway, that's why I keep running, even though it's clear that the two major parties, whichever party controls the congressional seat that I'm running in, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to come out and debate us, or even half the time they don't even fill out the surveys. It's really incredible
Right.
when we get all these surveys, there's no response from candidate, Democratic candidates. So that is kind of depressing. But again, I realize that this is, I'd love to see liberty in my lifetime. I may not, but you have to keep fighting for the world you want. I mean, there's just really no other alternative.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really good points there, and I just want to, the Zoom timer did kick on, so we're on a little bit of a limit now. But you mentioned it a lot on the website, and you mentioned it, a few times there. But that national debt number, it's over 30 trillion. It's going to pass 31 trillion soon. It won't take very long for it to cross that threshold. And to a lot of people, it just seems like this impossible weight that the country is carrying that we can't seem to shake off or make any progress on, or pay down any. I mean, how do we even begin to tackle our massive national debt?
Well, I think most Americans, it's just a number. What's that great line by Joseph Stalin? He said, I mean, obviously, I'm not a fan of Joe Stalin, but he had that great line. What was it? It was something like, a death is a catastrophe. 1 million deaths is a statistic.
Right.
And that's
right.
kind of how the American people, if it was their own, if I owed $40,000 or what. Of course, a lot of Americans do owe a lot in credit card debt, and because of our incredibly artificially low interest rates. But a lot of people, it just doesn't seem like we'll ever get to where Greece was, I don't know, 10 years ago and Venezuela is today. They don't understand how it could happen here. We could become another Venezuela or another Greece. It could easily happen because, Americans today, I really think that it sounds like we have this heritage of liberty, granted, but most Americans, it's like they're just, when it comes to politics, they're totally focused on the short run. And it's like, heads I win, tails you lose, Taylor, heads I win, tails you lose.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's Americans, unfortunately, put as much time they put less time and effort and seriousness into how they vote and who they support than they do buying a big screen TV. And that's really sad, but I think that's true. And because the average American, I think, when it comes to investing for the future, saving for their kids' college, if they even need to anymore, since the government will just, repudiate debt. But in other words, the average American, when it comes to buying a second home or even buying a first home, or what job they'll take, and in your case, you had to weigh all the pros and cons of leaving Tennessee and moving to Texas, and where in Texas and what job. Well, I think the average American, like most people probably worldwide, put a whole lot of thought and effort into that. But for some reason, those same people, when it comes to voting, it's like they've gone to Vegas and had a few drinks, and gee, do we play the crap tables, or we play blackjack, or play the slot machines, or it's just, there's just not much seriousness to it. And honestly, I think until that changes, then America gets the politicians that we deserve. And right now it's Uncle, Sleepy Joe and Donald Trump, neither of whom I'm a fan of. I mean, honestly, I guess I might get into trouble saying this, but between the two, I would probably have to say Trump is a little bit less worse than, Biden and Kamala Harris and Hillary and Barack, but not by much. And you would think a great country like we are, and we're obviously, the United States is arguably the greatest country in the history of man or beast. But, it's like, is that really the best we can do? Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden? Well, evidently it is. And it's really because the average American, I really do think they want something for nothing. They're like the proverbial college freshman who goes off to college and, they're 18 years old. They insist on being treated like an adult. But as soon as they run out of money, they get on the horn with their parents. Well, you're going to send me money, right? Run out of money. In other words, they want something for nothing. And, unfortunately, I think too many Americans, we saw.
All right. We are back. Had to open up another Zoom room to continue the conversation, but we were just getting started. So I would definitely love to hear the rest. You were talking about the national debt and how people just don't pay attention to it. They have other things going on, and there are other things that they're worried about, and they just don't think about the massive weight of all this debt that the U.S. has accumulated.
Right. Although I think that can't go on forever, of course. And when you have, like we're saying, 31 trillion and counting, and of course that doesn't even include state and local debt. My hometown, Houston, everybody, I mean, it's, as far as the big cities go, it's probably one of the better ones. But sure enough, they've promised their municipal workers, they've given them, really overly generous pensions. And I think they have, like, I don't know, it's many, many billions in obligations just for that. So in other words, that 31 trillion, it's not like it's just standing still. It continues to grow. And then, of course, we have the unfunded liabilities. I don't even know how much it is, but I've seen anywhere from 90 trillion to 200 trillion. And that's, basically you're mortgaging the next generation's future. And then again, this is just federal debt. It's not state debt or local debt. So, but for a lot of Americans, we haven't really experienced what Greece did. I guess it was right after the big meltdown, 15 years ago. So we haven't gone there yet, and certainly we haven't gone to where Venezuela is. But that could happen. I mean, you can't just keep piling on more and more debt. At some point, you have to address it. And of course, many libertarians, and I would consider myself one of them. We should consider repudiating it. And in other words, just saying that I'm sorry, we're not going to pay it off, because in order to pay it off, of course, you've got to tax more people, and taxation is theft, of course, and and we have a history going way back to the aftermath of our War of Independence against Great Britain. They did repudiate those debts. So, and of course, they also issued paper money. So, unfortunately, that was something that goes all the way back to the beginning, of the country. But yeah, so until things get bad, and of course, with the upcoming recession, and it could be a pretty bad one. I was listening today; it might even be worse than the one in 08, 09. Maybe that would wake people up, but unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic. When Americans, when things go bad, Americans, unfortunately, in the past almost 100 years, when things go bad, that doesn't mean that freedom will prevail. Like, Americans will say, "Oh, I get it. Those libertarians have been saying, this could happen." I don't think that's not going to be the response of many Americans. In fact, if anything, it'll be like COVID, where people will go, "Well, gee, shouldn't the government step in and do, this, that, and the other? Shouldn't they just continue?" Like, obviously, many Americans got checks in the mail because obviously the feds shut down, and the state governments did too. They shut down the economy. They put, millions of Americans under house arrest, essentially. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, when things get bad, when I was much younger, I thought things getting bad would mean that Americans would wake up and turn anti-government and turn libertarian. I'm not nearly. In fact, I don't think that will happen. It may not get worse, but obviously the government will have less money to spend when things are bad. But the idea that somehow that the upcoming recession is going to somehow wake the American people up to libertarianism, I don't think that's going to happen. And if anything, it's just as likely to happen that Americans move towards more statism, towards more government. And again, obviously the government will not be able to really raise taxes during the upcoming recession, but they'll probably try to print more money like they've done, like literally for the last, since the Great Depression. It's just spend and inflate. But at some point, again, like I was, just to wrap this up, you can't do what the last generation did to the current generation, where, when I was much younger, the federal debt was like $1 trillion. Then it went to $2 trillion under Reagan, and now it's 31 trillion. And I definitely remember, I was much younger, of course. This is in the 80s. We couldn't believe that Reagan had doubled. He doubled the national debt to 2 trillion. We thought that might. In fact, that's when Ron Paul quit the Republican Party. Of course, he was planning on running as the LP candidate, in 1988. But he had that great letter where he said, the Republican Party. Essentially, what he said was the Republican Party has lost all credibility when it comes to attacking big government. And boy, was he right.
Right.
And of course, now that we're $29 trillion more in debt, I mean, it just, if anything, he understated the truth. And so yeah, I'm not very optimistic about the near term. It really will take the next generation of people. I mean, I'm hoping that with all the homeschooling that we have now, we didn't have that back when I was in school, but now you have all these people who understand that, why should I have the government schools have anything to do with my precious children? So maybe, with homeschooling in the future, the little kids, I think they call them Generation Alpha, the beyond
Oh,
beyond
really?
the Zoomers. Yeah, it's called Generation Alpha. There's the little kids you see running around. I don't know. I guess they're 3 to 10. Yeah, those kids, if they're being homeschooled, and they get the right idea. Of course, there's a lot of bad ideas you can teach your kid, on your own. But if
Right.
we can just get enough of these young homeschooled kids, with some great ideas, then we have a shot. But that's going to take another 25 years, and that's how I look at it. It's this is a marathon. It's not. When I was younger, I thought that libertarianism would be within 10 years, 15 years around the corner. Now that I'm older, I realize that was very naive. And now I think, if we just start with the young people, if we can get enough people out of the government schools and enough, liberty-minded people, even if they're not complete libertarians, to understand that the government has no clothes, and you really don't want the government having anything to do with educating your children. And like I say, if we can get just a critical mass of liberty-minded people to raise their kids right, and then I think, again, these little kids running around, when they get to be adults, then we've got a shot. But that's a long time. That's a whole generation, and hopefully the federal debt won't be 60, 70 trillion by then. But it could be. And at that point, of course, you and me will be in some old folks home, hopefully, or somewhere. And, I don't know what could happen, but right now, the baby boom generation, they're starting to hit retirement age, and the money's just not there. And I think there are enough young people now who realize that it's like, hey, you old people, you've given us these trillions of dollars in debt, and now you don't want to cut Social Security payments, because Social Security it's very well protected. The
Right.
benefits are far more than you put into the system. I know Medicare in particular, the average American gets far more out of especially if you live well past 65, which of course people are doing now, and that's a good thing, of course, people living longer. But if you took all the dollars they put into Medicare during their earning years, it's nothing like what they're getting out, especially if you live to be in your 80s. And, that's usually the time when people have medical issues. And of course, with healthcare being completely cartelized by the government, obviously that doesn't help.
No.
That just makes prices higher. So anyway, yeah, I know that's pretty pessimistic on my end, but maybe you have some optimistic ideas that can bring things up some, Taylor. Do you?
Well, I wish I did. And well, like you mentioned, Social Security and Medicare, that's like the national debt is a crisis we're going to have to deal with a little further down the road. And Social Security and Medicare seems to be like the other big crisis that we have coming up, that like it's just that everyone knows it too. People talk about it. They'll even joke about it to the younger generation, like this money is not going to be here for you. You're paying into it, but you're not going to get anything out of it. I mean, it's going to dry up well before, someone like me or, ever gets to see any of it. I mean, and it's like you said, like the Republicans and Democrats just seem to have no interest in solving the problem at all. I mean, it doesn't matter who's in charge of Congress or who's president. Like, they just keep stacking more debt on top of debt that we already shouldn't have.
Sure. Yeah.
And so,
in fact,
like,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, please go ahead.
Well, I've always thought. Now, I was a Republican for literally just a few years before I became a libertarian, because I just saw. I mean, in other words, I come out of the right. I just do. I mean, I understand, the Nolan chart, and where, I'm pretty much right on second base. Whereas, I guess a total authoritarian would be at home plate. But I kind of came from the right. I think it's fair to say, I was kind of a Reaganite, and then I saw a lot of the inconsistencies. But the honest to God truth is, the Republicans have the advantage when they campaign. They can always say, we're for less government too, but we're not like those crazy libertarians where we're going to cut your Social Security and cut your Medicare. So they can demagogue those issues. They can say, oh, those libertarians, they're crazy. They want to cut, 95% of the federal government, which of course I do, and hopefully most libertarians do too. But the Republicans they'll say, yeah, well, we're also for lower taxes, so let's see those libertarians top that. And yet, we'll give you lower taxes, American voters, but we're not going to cut your benefits because, back, I don't know if you remember, I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but in the 80s, the whole Kemp-Roth thing was like, hey, if we cut taxes, if we cut them enough, and if the tax rate is just at the right amount of marginality, that's kind of a fancy word, but the truth is, when taxes are at a certain point, you can actually cut taxes and increase government revenue. And so this goes way back to like the Reagan years. So a lot of Republican politicians, beginning with Kemp-Roth, beginning with that supply side revolution of the 80s, they decided, hey, I don't have to come out to, against any cuts because I'm for cutting taxes. And when we cut taxes, it's going to actually grow it'll actually increase government revenue. Well, I don't know why you'd want to do that anyway, but anyway, yeah. So the Republicans, the point is, it's like the Republicans, unfortunately, to an average American voter who doesn't give it a whole lot of thought, when he hears that, he'll say, oh yeah, I'll vote Republican because, they'll cut my taxes or at least keep my taxes from going up, but they won't cut my benefits, which of course is what we need. Obviously we need to get rid of taxation completely, but you can't just keep spending like a drunken sailor. I mean, right. You just can't. I mean, you have to cut government programs and presumably, you and I know, and libertarians understand that if we had a completely free society, I mean, the amount of economic growth would be so great, you wouldn't need the government. You wouldn't need these cradle to grave programs like Social Security and Medicare and even Medicaid. But the average American, because I think, again, like I was saying earlier, I don't think they give it enough thought to where they think, oh no, I want the security of the government safety net there. And again, like I said, we saw this during COVID. Unfortunately, many Americans like, oh, well, let's have the government just send us money into our bank accounts and, we'll take the security of government power over freedom. And unfortunately, until that changes, and I don't know what it'll take to have that change. Like I say, I think it's certainly not, if there's an economic recession or depression, which I think there will be, I don't know that it's going to move the U.S. in a more libertarian direction. I think it really will take, like I was saying earlier, it's going to take a critical mass of people taking their kids out of government school and homeschooling them, and and basically raising them and the old libertarian belief system, to where when they hit that adulthood, they'll understand, oh, I see, you old guys basically mortgaged our future, so guess what, old people, we're going to cut your benefits. I mean, there's no other way. I mean, it's unsustainable. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So I mean, honestly, that's just what's going to have to happen. People are going to, I mean, honestly, I think people who have, the old people tend to be the richest generation anyway. So they're probably going to have a means tested Social Security program where if you make so much money anyway, you're not going to get your benefits. And that's very unpopular, I'm sure, from even maybe among libertarians, but there's simply no other way. I mean, either that or you're going to have to repudiate the debt, which I'm all for. I have no problem with repudiating the debt, but that's kind of a libertarian red meat issue. I mean, it's the average American goes, oh no, those are, the government promised me all this money. And so, and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, they did. Unfortunately, the only way for the government to keep that promise is to continue taxing the next generation of people. And as we believe, taxation is theft, and I don't approve that. So I'd rather the government obviously either repudiate the debt or sell off all the federal lands. And I think 90% of the state of Nevada, big chunks of Alaska are owned by the federal government. We'll sell that land off and see what you can do about paying some of those Social Security obligations. But obviously we have to reform the whole Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid systems to where it's not going to just double and triple. And I mean, we're going to have to cut benefits. There's no two ways about it. And it's not very popular, but that's just the fact.
And, sadly, I think you're right that it is going to take, a generation or so before some younger people start to become more liberty minded and start seeing the issues that, that you're talking about. And I think you're also right when you say, in the short term, it is going to be exactly like what we saw during COVID. I think people are going to lean on the government even harder. They're going to expect it. The next time the economy falls into, a recession and people are hurting real bad, they're going to expect the government to give them what they did during COVID. And, the left is going to push for it and they're going to openly call for it. I mean, that's going to be their playbook, and Republicans, they don't have a spine to oppose them. So, they're going to go along with it. And then we're going to see another cycle like we're trapped in now. We're going to print off all this money and spend all this money. And then inflation is going to just tear us apart. I mean, it's still rough. I know the Biden administration is trying to play up some wins that they've gotten recently, if they want to call them that, or Democrats want to campaign on it. But inflation is still it's still hurting people really badly, and it has been for a while. And this is just a natural result of what happens whenever you let the government do stuff like that. And sadly, I don't think we've seen the last of it. I think we are going to have to suffer through, learning the actions of our consequences again and again until I don't know what it would take. I don't know what it would take for more young people to get involved in libertarianism. Well, how exactly did you get involved with it? What was your big, was it the national debt?
Well, honestly, it started with an insult. Or I guess I got my feelings hurt. Now, it was the spring, I turned 21, in July of 1980. So I was still 20, and I was a Reaganite. Like I mentioned before, I was at UT Austin. And I joined the Young Texans for Reagan. And there was a guy, his name is Robert Hamilton. I wonder if I haven't seen him in many years. Anyway, he was a libertarian, and people told me that. And we were talking about the campaign, and Reagan was running against, the first George H.W. Bush. And anyway, somewhere it came along where we were talking with a couple of other people, and we were all saying, or I was saying, well, if Reagan gets the nomination, he's going to have to moderate. And by that, I really meant what I think I meant from 42 and a half years ago. I meant, all this, he was a real anti-abortion and anti-ERA. And so that's really what I meant when I said moderate. But Robert, who, was a few years older, and back when I was 20, I really did admire people even just a few years older because, just their experience, and I had a lot of respect for older people. And anyway, I must have said it wrong because, again, this is many years ago, but I said something like, well, I think, Reagan, if he gets the nomination, if he ends up winning, he's just going to have to moderate. I used words similar to that, like he's going to have to moderate. And so Robert Hamilton, again, a few years older, he said, I really can't believe you're talking like that. I'm really disappointed in you. So I don't know if that's an insult or my feelings were hurt. So I did what a young person would do. I went to the library because I'd heard Robert Hamilton was a libertarian. So I wanted to find out more about libertarianism. So I went to the UT library, Perry Castanet Library, and I went to the card catalog, and I found a book by John Hospers, and it was called, I think that's so funny. The name of the book was Libertarianism, A Political Philosophy for Tomorrow. I'm not making this up. You can Google it. And it was libertarian, and it was a big, thick book. And I read the whole thing, and I'd like to think the rest is history. And then after that, I read, Murray Rothbard had just come out with For a New Liberty. I read that pretty much cover to cover. And then also, around the same time, Milton Friedman had written Free to Choose. And now, of course, he was a bigger name than John Hospers or Murray Rothbard, especially back then. And
Right.
anyway, but the point is, so it started out where, I had heard of the Libertarians, and I was already kind of a Reagan Republican, and there were certainly some inconsistencies to conservatism. They claim that they want less government, but then here they are wanting to ban abortion, and in those days they also were pretty much anti-gay rights, and all the social issues. So I always thought that, well, that's kind of a contradiction, but it really was that, if you want to call it an insult or my feelings were hurt, but I did what I think a person should do, because I did really respect Robert Hamilton, and he really was a libertarian. And so I went and I checked out some books in the library, because but there was no internet, and that's
Right.
kind of how you had to do it. And just reading John Hosper's book. Now, he's kind of a minarchist, and of course, Rothbard was an anarchist, and I never really have gotten much involved. To me, I want to get rid of 99%, pretty much 99% of the government and all taxation. I do believe taxation is theft. So I've never really gotten into the minarchism versus anarchism debate. I just don't think it's that important for libertarians to spend any time, as long as you understand that taxation is theft, and we need to end the Fed, and get rid of the draft, all these other things. But anyway, just to wrap up my long answer is, it really just started out with that slight insult. I felt hurt that this older guy, who was also in the Reagan campaign. So he was a libertarian for Reagan. There were actually quite a few back then. And, but when he said that, I just felt, like I just can't, he told me, he said, I'm disappointed in you. I believe is how he put it. And I felt hurt. And so I didn't get mad at him. I went back and I researched, and I'm like, hey, he's right. If anything, Reagan is way too moderate. I mean, properly, phrasing it correctly. Yeah, Reagan was a real disappointment, believe me. I mean, what Ron Paul said in '87 when he quit the Republican Party was just spot on, full stop. I mean, he said it completely correctly. The Republican Party, Reagan won like 94 states in 2 elections. He could have done so much more. I mean, I don't know, you may be too young to remember any of that, but I'm not, and I remember it very well. And, Reagan won in '84, his second term, he won 49 states. And if he had really been anti-government, he could have done so much in that second term. And, he didn't. He turned out to be just another politician. And so Robert Hamilton was right. But I used that little, those hurt feelings to do something about it. And so by the time I read through, Hosper's book and Rothbard's book, and of course, I was already, Milton Friedman is, if he's not an outright libertarian, he's very, very, very close.
Right.
And so once I read those books, and that's way back 42 years ago, that I was hooked. I was a libertarian. I went and I met some more libertarians through the Reagan campaign. In fact, some libertarians here in Austin, Gene Berkman was a guy I met way back then, and he believed in voting. He voted for Reagan for president, and of course he regretted it, like everyone else. In hindsight, it turned out to be a mistake. But yeah, I voted for that year. I volunteered for the Reagan campaign, so I went ahead in November of 1980. I voted for Reagan at the top of the ticket, but down ballot, I voted for every libertarian candidate. I don't think I voted for any other Republican. Now, at that time, I'd already moved from Houston, so I couldn't vote for Ron Paul. So in fact, I don't know that I didn't vote for Ron Paul again until 2008 when he ran for president. But yeah, obviously Ron Paul would be a Republican I support. But and today there's Rand Paul and Thomas Massey and the late, he's not in Congress anymore, Justin Amash. These are all great Republicans. And of course, YAL, Young Americans for Liberty, they have their Hazlitt Coalition. Those are all solid guys. So I definitely would support those guys. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of how I became a libertarian, because I felt my feelings were hurt by an older libertarian guy. But he turned out to be right. He turned out to be 1,000% correct. And so, but I use that I use that, hurt feelings to actually do my research, and I don't regret any of it.
That
And
is,
really, since 1980, that honestly, Reagan was the last Republican I voted for. Other than I voted for Ron Paul in the 2008 primary, and had Rand Paul had Ron won, of course, I would have voted for him, even though he was a Republican, and I would have voted for Rand had Rand defeated, the Trump phenomena. But of
right.
course, nobody could do that, and so now, I pretty much, I don't know that I vote for. I'm so disappointed with Republicans. Most of my close friends, I don't know how it is for you, but most of my friends are, if they're not Libertarian, they're Republican, and so a lot of them like Trump because of all the woke stuff, and I don't really blame them for that. But they don't understand the way you and I do, Taylor, about that $31 trillion debt. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not just a number. It's not just a statistic. It really means something. And at some point, obviously, we're going to have to either sell off every single federal land, but you can't just do that, and even maybe even repudiate the national debt. You're
Mhm.
going to have to reform the programs. You're going to have to cut benefits, even for existing. I don't know, maybe somebody 70 and older or 75 and older. You'd say, okay, you're so old, we're not going to cut your benefits. But people younger, they need to be told now, that hey, you're not going to get any more than, I don't know, maybe twice what you put in the system during your working years, because right now it's the whole program. Social Security is just set. There's these cost of living adjustments, but they're overly generous. They give people even more than just the regular rate of inflation increase. And so, but that all has to be reformed. And again, if we debated, if there was actually a congressional race with Doggett and the Republican, if we actually had debates, and where then I would obviously bring this up, but of course they won't do it, and I'm sure if they did, they would label me some kind of kook and crazy nut that's going to, push grandma off the cliff, in her wheelchair. Obviously that we're not going to do that, but
Right.
that's how we would be. That's how we would be, characterized. So,
I mean,
so, but
Doggett probably won't even debate the Democrat, right? We would mention that a little bit before we
well,
started recording, but
yeah,
he's probably not going to debate at all. You don't think?
well, no, I mean there's no reason now. See what these candidates. Doggett is pretty old now. He's the Democrat, and Sharon is the Republican. She's much younger. She's probably in her mid 30s, I think. Yeah, she's roughly in her mid 30s. Doggett's in his mid 70s, and I'm somewhere in between. But I guess I'm closer to Doggett in age. But the point is that what he does, because he's so old, he has a staff of people who run his social media. I'm pretty sure it's not him, because I do follow him on Twitter and on Facebook, and like he's out meeting with some old senior citizens, and so you see images on Twitter. Here's the congressman, it's a campaign, so here's Mr. Doggett, or well, I guess they even use the fact that he's a congressman. Here's Congressman Doggett meeting with the Hayes County. Well, I'm not even sure. Let's say the Travis County senior citizens of Westlake. And I mean, that's the campaign. Like, he's very active on Twitter, as are I think most congressional incumbents. It's all them kissing babies, and but it's nothing about ideas. Oh, I mean, sure. Like after the Dobbs decision, of course, I'm pro-choice. He really came out against the Republicans, and I am pro-choice, but so that decision prompted some real ideas that he actually said something about, the Dobbs decision, how it was a bad decision for women's choice. And that is true. And I'm trying to think of what else he would have done. Well, I'm sure he's down with Biden's, inflation.
Oh,
What
I'm
is it? Let's
sure.
fight inflation, and blaming Putin for higher prices. But that's kind of what they do. But don't get me wrong. It's not like he's very active. Like I say, most congressional incumbents, they're all over Twitter, and they're all over Facebook, and I think even now TikTok, there's some candidates on TikTok now, but it's nothing about ideas. It's nothing about that $31 trillion debt, or about Social Security running out of money in a few years. No, it's pictures of them, like I say, kissing babies, or meeting with with old senior citizens. And of course, senior citizens tend to vote more than anyone else. Oh, and then he was really in favor of the what is it, the college loan repudiation.
Oh, right.
He was very much for that. I'm not even sure if Sharon, the Republican, I'm not sure if she said much. So she's also on social media, but it's all very very manicured and closely watched. They don't, but there's no ideas there. They don't see that debt as a problem, or even the war in Ukraine. I mean, I'm sure like all the Democrats supported the aid package to Ukraine. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
you feel. Most libertarians like me, and I think I speak for most libertarians, and maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but the whole Ukraine thing, the U.S. foreign policy caused a lot of that. I mean, if we had non-interventionism just the last 8 years in Ukraine, I don't think there'd be a war there now. And but most Americans don't know that. Most Democrats don't know that. So yeah, he's all for aiding Ukraine. Putin is like practically another Hitler. So that's kind of what passes. As you know, I'm sure if you keep up with things, that's what
Oh,
passes
yeah.
for
I
serious
mean,
political dialogue.
yeah, he's just I don't know. He just goes along with the Democratic status quo. That's his narrative. That's his agenda. He's not really any more impressive than that. That's just kind of the role that he plays. And, like you said earlier, he gets to play that role and do it successfully because of the district that he's in. It's just not a competitive district. They drew it that way intentionally. There's actually a lot of people in San Antonio that turned on Doggett because they basically drew him out of San Antonio and put him all in Austin. And a lot of people were thinking that he might try to run for a district in San Antonio because, those are people that he's represented for some time now. But, then, he went to run in the district that he's in now. And a lot of his San Antonio fans are salty about it, but they don't get to vote for him anyway. So, it's not like they get a say in it.
Well, the Republicans redrew the line, and so obviously he's a Democrat. So what they do is they put more than enough Democratic voters in his district. So what he ended up having to do, see, he was in 35. So
Right.
when they created 37 and 38, he doesn't actually live in 37. I actually live in 37, but again, it's not. I mean, in the past, this is like my first congressional election out of what, 5, where I actually live in the district. So I can't really. I would never attack him for that anyway. Now, so yeah, so his district now he's from Austin. I mean, I know enough about him. I met him years ago. He's been in politics really since Watergate. He's like in his mid-70s. He got his law degree from UT Austin. I mean, in other words, because he's from Austin and he went to UT, which is my alma mater. I mean, I've met him more than a few times. In fact, he's a nice guy. He's not a. I mean, he's not a. I mean, he's a typical politician, but really, he really does believe these things. Like, I mean, I know when I ran against him 4 years ago. Now, this was before the college loan repudiation of college debt repudiation.
Mm-hmm.
He was all for obviously UT was close to. I guess UT was he didn't actually represent the physical UT, but a lot of students live a few blocks who lived in his district attended UT. So, it's kind of political suicide to attack UT Austin. So he didn't. And he was all for, more student loans, more federal money given to colleges and university, so he never, in fact, I attacked him 4 years ago on that. I didn't get very far because again, it wasn't much of in fact, I even submitted a guest column to the Daily Texan. This is 4 years ago. They didn't run it. And I'm not surprised, but it's always the same thing. It's like we need more money spent for education, that we need to keep college accessible. So he's completely proponent of that view. And then, like I say, now he supports President Biden. I'm trying to think of what else. Now he's pro-choice, which I'm pro-choice myself, and I'm sure there's some other issues, but of course the war in Ukraine, that's a real disappointment. Even Barbara Lee, I don't know if you remember, I think she was even the only congressman who voted for that ridiculous back in 2001. Barbara Lee represents She's a black congresswoman from the Oakland area, I believe. Was she
Right.
still in Congress? She voted for Ukraine aid. I was somewhat surprised. In fact, every single Democrat did. All the squad. So, in back, I'm old enough to remember where, the one salvation to liberal and leftist Democrats is they were anti-war. And now
Right.
not one Democrat voted against the Ukraine package. And I was a little surprised. I really was. And it's disappointing. And now what's so ironic, it's the right wingers. I don't know if you know or not. You probably know because you're on top of things. Margie Taylor Greene, I'm not a big fan of her because
No.
I really think Trump lost. I think Trump lost fair and square. But, Tom Woods on his podcast just a few months ago, he had, he was playing all these clips by Margie Taylor Greene, and she was totally against the Ukraine aid package. And she almost sounded like a libertarian. So even though I'm not that kind of right-wingy person, and, not only her, but Matt Gaetz of Florida, he's also very anti-war. So even though there's a lot of objectionable things about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, at least they got the war right. At least they got that right. And then the Democrats, who you would think they would be, the squad, Barbara Lee, they all blew it on Ukraine. They all did. And, I don't know if you know or not,
Hey,
but, Scott.
hey, Clark, just real quick. We've got about a minute left. I just wanted to give you some time here at the end. Hate to cut you off, but just to promote anything that you might want to promote as we wind down here.
Well, if people do want to go and read my long, I guess you call it my manifesto at my website, it's clarkpforcongress.com, and I have a Facebook page. It's just type in Clark Patterson for U.S. Congress, and it should be me that comes up on Facebook. So those are where, and then of course I'm on Twitter at Clark Patterson 12, which is my congressional Twitter, but I'm not as active there. I'm really, the best place to go is either Facebook or my website.